Hi and welcome back. Today we're in front of the Capitol Records studio in Hollywood. Joining us is Senior Vice President of A&R, Tim Devine. Welcome, Tim.
Hello, Ralph. How are you?
Good to meet you. Tell us, Tim, you used to work here.
I did.
Why is this place so magical?
Well, Capitol Records and the Capitol Tower. I mean, it's a legendary building, for one. It was built the same year I was born, so we're the same age. And there's so much musical history here. I mean, you know, going back to Glenn Wallach and Johnny Mercer and, you know, Nat King Cole. They used to call this the house that Nat built. And so many great artists have been here. So many great records have been made in the studios here. And obviously everybody remembers the impact that the Beatles had with Capitol Records and the Beach Boys, and then so many other artists that came along that made a big difference in jazz and rock and roll and hip-hop now, and you know, it's a legendary label.
And can you tell us about this specific magical place, because we're standing on the Hollywood star of Bonnie Raitt.
Yes, look at that, right in front of the building. Well, you know, I had signed Bonnie to Capitol Records. She had had a long career on Warner Brothers and was kind of in a plateau phase over there and was looking for a new deal. And I think, you know, it wasn't the hottest idea in the world, but it was something I looked at and said, she's got a lot of tradition, you know, based on the blues and folk and rock and roll, and could that be brought to a much larger audience in some way? And we decided to take a chance on it. I decided to take a chance on it and brought her over here. And because I think this was a smaller label than Warner Brothers, she was able to get more attention, and it seemed a little more special maybe. And we just kept you know, working on songs, making the record, the first record, Nick of Time. And then once it got out there, people were giving it rave reviews and a lot of good feedback. And it became a very special project, unlike you know, your average new release record. People really warmed up to it. I think she was seen as an underdog. We had Don Was do the record, and you know, this was before he was sort of Don Was. I knew him from his band Was Not Was, which we distributed at Warner Brothers. And we just kept getting more and more people on board with the music, and it eventually took hold. Everybody who heard it liked it and told 5 other people. And it was actually 52 weeks to the day that record eventually went #1 and, you know, swept the Grammys. Well, I've been in the music business most of my life. I started very young. I was going to shows when I was 12 years old. I became a music journalist, just largely so I could get closer to the music and, you know, get tickets to shows and get albums to review and all that stuff. I was reviewing albums and concerts when I was back in junior high school, so I've been doing this a long time. And I always wanted to work in the music business, specifically the record business, because my whole philosophy was that the record, the album, was sort of like a movie. You know, you could work in the theater, you could work in aspects of the technical side of it, but you know, people really go to see a movie because of the story and because of the actors. And the same thing is true of an album. An album, you know, people buy an album because of the music and the artist. Those are the 2 primary things. So I thought, well, how do I get involved in that epicenter, really, of where that all happens? And I had done a bunch of things in the periphery. I had been, like I said, a music writer. I had worked in radio. I worked at my college radio station up in Berkeley. And I kind of pulled this all together. I first became a college rep for A&M Records, so I got to promote the music. Then I went to Warner Brothers to become a marketing guy, where I worked with Prince and U2 and Devo and Bob Marley and all these great acts, Black Sabbath, Thin Lizzy, Television. And from there, I got hired over here at Capitol to be a A&R guy and get really into the talent side of it, the making of the records. And Bonnie was like one of the first artists I signed.
What did you do after you left Capitol Records?
Well, from here, I went to Columbia Records, which is part of Sony, and I ended up running their West Coast operation. With still a mind towards signing artists, and I had signed a band called Train, which did really well, and I brought in Rick Rubin's label, so we got Johnny Cash and System of a Down and bands like that. I did a deal with a label called Aware, which brought us John Mayer, Five for Fighting, some of those bands. And I worked on some soundtracks over there as well, like I had done here. Over at Capitol, I had worked on Clueless and Rain Man and the John Lennon movie. And over there, I worked on different projects. I Know What You Did Last Summer, the Orange County movie with Jack Black. I eventually ended up signing a bunch of other acts. I signed Switchfoot. I signed a girl named Katy Perry that nobody knew of at the time, and I was able to really sell records all around the world because Sony has such a strong global presence as well, which turned out to be a very successful move because it was more difficult to sell records overseas through the Capitol system, I think, than the Sony system. Bonnie did well in America, she did well in Australia, she did well in Canada, made some inroads into the UK and Europe, but the Sony machine has a better global distribution operation, I think, than probably than anyone else.
So Tim, we recently obtained a 3 million copy of the Bonnie Raitt album.
Wow.
And it was made out to you. It has all the formats, including mini disc, vinyl, DCC, CD, and cassettes. Can you tell us anything about this?
Well, sure. I mean, we were very excited about every milestone along the way. Everybody was very invested in this project at this point in time. And, the first gold record was like a big thing to celebrate. And then after the Grammys, we ended up going platinum. And then after we went platinum, we went double platinum, and it just kept going and going and going, and we would release more and more singles and videos and things like that. And eventually, the record went on to sell about 5 million copies, just here in the US alone, plus overseas sales. And this was one step along the way where we got to 3 million, and every time we hit a new milestone, we'd have a plaque ceremony. And it was, she was an artist that everybody loved, and so we wanted to celebrate each of these milestones in a, robust way. And this is one of the pieces of evidence of that.
Well, what you do is the honor of signing it.
Signing the record.
Well,
sure.
Signing the plaque, so we know it's actually.
All right. Sure. There you go.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. I have a few digital compacts cassettes. Maybe you can sign the front of those.
$100 on eBay.
They all go to the museum, sir. So did you ever own a DCC player, as far as you know?
As far as I know. I never owned a DCC player, although we had to approve test pressing samples of them from time to time. But no, I never had one personally because I didn't think there was enough repertoire available. I mean, the thing about new formats, so many people have tried to introduce new formats over the years, and we tried it at Sony with the dual disc and the mini disc, and all these technologies have come forward to try to sell more music, whether it was digital or physical or tape-based formats. And they only really took off when there was a substantial advantage to the consumer and a unity of interest with the manufacturers, I think. And if you look at the reason the compact disc was successful and a lot of other formats weren't, is that you had Sony and Philips for the first time really marrying their technology and their marketing efforts together, and I think that's what made it work. I think in too many years past, there have been competing formats that, for some strange reason, hit the market at the same time, whether it was VHS and Beta in the film business, or it was the mini disc and the DCC in the music business, and the consumer is only going to go for one or the other in any big way. And when you have these competing interests, I think the consumer gets confused, doesn't know what to buy, and often ends up buying neither. But CDs took off and reinvented the business because it was one thing for people to focus on. It was a round disc that sort of looked like a record, and you could put it in your pocket. The adaptation was huge. The machines were eventually ubiquitous. Prices all came down, and it took over the business, really.
So, what kind of music do you listen to?
I listen to all kinds of music. Like I was saying earlier, I ran the college radio station in Berkeley, and it was a very mind-expanding experience, if you can imagine, between jazz and electronic music and spoken word and folk and everything, really. But I come out of the rock era, so most of what I like is in the kind of rock, alternative rock. But I have a lot of jazz albums. I have all kinds of music. I mean, I'm the guy with 27 sound effects records too. So I really like it all. I mean, what I miss is the emphasis on the album format as opposed to so much focus on singles now, because I think the album was kind of the artist's palette, and it's hard to make a broad artistic statement like a U2 or like a Neil Young or the Rolling Stones or whatever, or the Beatles, of course. We're standing in front of Capitol, through singles as you would through the album format. You don't go to the movies to see one scene in a movie.
Correct. So
to me, that was a big difference in the way music is consumed, and it's had a major effect on the music business, going from albums to digital to CDs and all, and to finally streaming now, where it really is all about the songs and less about the album, for sure.
So on what formats do you listen?
Well, I listen to streaming like everybody else. I still have 5,000 CDs. I still have 2,000 vinyl albums. I collect and save everything, because you never know when you're going to see it again. And I mean, the vinyl albums I have sell for 3 times as much money when they've been reissued. The gatefolds and the packaging and the posters and the stand-ups. We did so many great album covers. When I was at Capitol, I worked with the Beastie Boys, and they had done the Paul's Boutique album, which was a 4-panel, recreation of a block in New York. And you just don't see that stuff anymore. The artwork has been detached from the music, and I think that's kind of a drag, because the artwork, if you look at Sgt. Pepper or Pink Floyd and Hypnosis and Led Zeppelin covers and all those things, there's so much great artwork that really broadened the experience of what was on that album. And they said you can't sell a book without a cover, or you can't tell a book from its cover, but you actually could with albums. A great album cover usually showed that somebody had some foresight and all as to what the music inside was going to be like. That's what pulled you in.
But isn't with the resurgence of vinyl, isn't that partly coming back? People wanting to have that pride of ownership, really start looking at covers again?
I think so. I think so. I think the vinyl resurgence is great because it does, you know, harken back to the days where the artwork and the music were bonded together. I think it's exaggerated in terms of, you know, it's 2 or 3% of the market. It's not 50% of the market. But it's, again, sort of like the DCC, it's sort of like the mini disc. It's an extension, it's actually a more successful extension of the alternative formatting that can broaden your audience and give them something more to go on. You know, it's part of a whole package. It's sort of the difference to me in like in the software business. In the early days of the software business, everything came in this big box, like a cereal box almost, and really all you're buying is that disc, you know, 3-inch disc or floppy or whatever, or today, you know, it's just a download. So today the equivalent of streaming is the download of the software where there's no packaging and, you know, none of that stuff. And I miss that. I think that the packaging on all this stuff was part of the product. I mean, can you imagine if you just went in and, you know, bought Wheaties, you know, by the scoop instead of, you know, with Kobe Bryant on the cover of the box or whoever? It's just a different experience.
In one of the interviews during your tenure at Capitol, you gave an interview to, I believe, the Taxi magazine, and there you predicted that the internet would have obviously had a big influence on the music business. One of your concerns was the filter between the great and not so great music. Do you think that has happened?
Yeah, I think what I kind of predicted about one of the effects of the internet on the music business is absolutely happening now, which is that, you know, you go on Spotify and you look through the new releases and there's 80, 100, 120 new releases for the week. And I just don't think the public can evaluate and separate it all. And it really has flattened out the market in a way. I mean, I tell people all the time that I used to believe there was this model which was kind of like a pyramid. And you had the labels at the top, you know, the creators, the artists and the labels. You had the media kind of on one corner of the pyramid, which was MTV and radio. And then you had the record stores and retail on the third end. So everything existed inside that frame. Then, you know, Napster came along, MySpace came along, all these other permutations, Lala.com, all places where you could get music outside of that frame. YouTube obviously blew out the media possibilities, and so, and you know, and 100 other examples. So what happened was, it was great for artists in a way because every artist had a chance now. Every artist could have a Facebook page and have their social media following and have their videos online and all that kind of stuff. And yet, it was much harder to get a critical mass because there was so much competition. I mean, imagine a sports league, imagine baseball or basketball or the NFL allowing, you know, 5 million players to be on a team. Nobody would know who anybody was. And it's kind of the same thing in music. And what's happened is that pyramid, where you had the big stars at the top, has kind of flattened out. So more people have a shot at some success, but less people have a shot at mega success.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of what I predicted when I saw the availability of music online. I mean, it was inevitable. You can't stop technology, and there's a lot of positive things about it as well. But it does make it harder for people to find music and filter and distinguish music the way, you know, your favorite DJ did when you were a kid.
Is that also an explanation why smaller bands start using obscure formats like cassettes, DCC, mini disc, and even L-cassette again to release their new music?
Well, I think anything you can do to stand out is good, right? I mean, when we were doing this, a lot of times we'd do it around a gig. we would have a band that was bigger than the venue come and play like a small intimate club show, right? Like, you know, I saw the Police at the Whiskey A Go Go after they were already playing stadiums. You know, the Boomtown Rats played Fredericks of Hollywood lingerie store, and they got attention that way. And so I think the same thing could be said for the alternative formats. It's like when you break the mold and you do something unusual, it gives you a new angle to talk about your product and your project. And I think that's, you know, kind of a similar situation. When you're a new band, you need something that's going to set you apart. You need a lot of things when you're a new band, right? You need luck, you need persistence, you need great material, not necessarily in that order. And that's, you know, the formatting thing is just one thing that you can do. But we've seen that over the years. I mean, we've seen picture discs and colored vinyl and special packaging and things like that. So I remember when I was a kid, I used to work for a little music magazine that had a flexi disc in every issue. And
I remember those, yeah.
Flexi Pop, I think it was called. And, you know, bands would put their music out that way because it was just another avenue to kind of separate yourselves from the pack. So I think it all fits together. Nobody knows the exact formula. It's different for different people and different bands at different moments in time. But I think all those things can be useful to get attention.
Will it survive the vinyl resurgence, or you think it'll still go back to where it was 20 years ago, let's say 5 years from now?
I think the vinyl resurgence seems pretty solid. You know, unlike the mini disc or the DCC or some of these other formats, I think the vinyl thing came up very organically. And I also think that, you know, there were already a lot of turntables in the market. A lot of them were dusty and not being used, but at least the ability to play the music was already there in the millions. And you didn't have to convince somebody to buy a new $500, $1,000, $5,000 piece of equipment. So I think that it eliminated that barrier to entry. And then it's just cool, man. It's just the coolest thing, right? Because you get to, you know, drop the needle, you get the warm sound, and, you know, everybody has memories of their first album and album covers, and it's a much more organic format to the record buyer than some of these other things that had no history, had no link to any kind of cultural significance. And I think vinyl is probably going to stick around, and I think it's kind of the antidote to streaming. Like I say, it's a more rich, robust, organic experience. So I don't see it abating anytime soon. I also don't see it taking over the market.
I really enjoyed meeting you and
my pleasure.
And hearing your opinions about things. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And we'll be in touch soon, okay?
The music lives on.
The music lives on.
Take care.
Thank you.